Today's topic, I'm super excited. Today's topic is essentially, what is modern day spirituality? How do we define spirituality in this century, in this age, and especially with the kind of world situation that's going on? How do we look at spirituality in a different way to understand it? And I want to backtrack a little bit here and look at what are the core concepts when we just look at the word. I love to look at the etymology, the origin of words. Spirituality is a mix of spirit and this uality, or I like to say it's like a rituality. So it's a spirit and a ritual, a spiritual, right? Now, when we look at spirit, how do we define spirit? That's the first step. And for a lot of people, you look at the idea of spirit and the first thought is, ooh, yeah, that's, if you're not in the conscious community, if you're not into the woo-woo, if you're not into, more alternative ways of thinking, you mention spirit to most people, and either if they're very religious, they'll be like, ooh, yeah, amen, hallelujah. Others will be like, ooh, yeah, I'm not into that. Like, I don't believe in soul and this and that. And they'll shy away. So I want to define spirit in a slightly different way than is the normal. The way that I like to look at spirit is that it is what inspires. You see, in spirit is to inspire. That's literally where the word comes from, right? It's to inspire. So we have this in spiritu, or inspiration. So what inspires you is spirit. It's what animates you, right? It's when we talk about the soul or the spirit, we're talking about something within the flesh, around the flesh, and through the flesh that's like woo, making you move and live and be alive. I call that inspiration. And so we're going to define for today's talk spirit as simply being inspiration. It's what inspires you. Now we get to the second part of being spiritual, right? For spirituality. And I talked about it as a ritual. And a ritual, again, can be a word that people will have certain perspectives about. They might think to themselves, oh, it's you get your incense stick and you shake it about and you sit down at your altar and you have your ritual. But brushing your teeth in the morning is a ritual. Having breakfast, lunch, and dinner at certain times every day is a ritual. We have so many rituals. They are just consistent behaviors that we tend to do in the same place at the same time every day. That's what a ritual is. But I want to take it even further than that, because we look at more modern day thinking around habits, right? Ways of perpetually defining, conditioning, and elevating our behaviors in how we look at the world and how we act in the world. These are our habits. So now we look at habits as being the ritual and spirit being that which inspires you. We combine the two, and modern day spirituality, the way I'd like to define it today, is the habits that inspire you. The habits that inspire you. So spirituality, modern day spirituality, the way we're going to define it for today is the habits that inspire you. So from that basis is where we're going to go with today's talk on modern day spirituality. By the way, if you ever have any questions for anybody who's on the call, you can just write it into the chat. I'll be able to see it, and that way I can respond to it, okay? So let's look at where most people enter spirituality or enter into a desire for inspiration. For the most part, and not even those looking for inspiration, but just kind of all of us, there is a mentality, I would call it an unfortunate lie that has been shared through society, unspoken actually. I don't think people actually say it so much to each other, but it's something that seems to kind of find its way, creep up into our minds, that says, I'm broken. It says, I'm broken. There's something wrong with me. And this mentality is there because of many reasons. There's the reason that as we were growing up, we may have had people tell us, oh, no, don't do that. That's bad. And so you immediately be like, oh, that's bad. I did it. I'm bad. Something's wrong with me. And I know that sounds like a big leap, but unfortunately between the ages of 0 to 7, we're really, really, really impressionable. And so something as simple as that can dictate the rest of your life if you're not aware of it. And so all of a sudden you think there's something wrong with you. And they say that we get about 40,000 no's, negative reinforcements, to like every 200 yeses. it's a ridiculous, split between our positive reinforcement and our negative reinforcement in life. Not only do we have that going on, but then we have the natural biological negative bias that happens because of the reptilian brain, our amygdala in the back of our brain, that is built for the stress response, for fight or flight. And so it's constantly on alert, looking for what might be dangerous. And so it's going, is that wrong over there? Is that dangerous over there? Is that negative over there? Is that going to hurt me over there? And we are built at the core with that for our survival, because, as a caveman or cavewoman, you didn't want to be eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. So if you heard a sound, you'd be like, oh, I know that sound. And you could go, you could run, you could flight, or you could fight if you knew how to fight a saber-toothed tiger. Now, with that in mind, if we have this negative bias kind of inbuilt, and we're also being told no all the time, then we're going to have this conditioning from early on in our childhood and throughout our lives of thinking that there's something wrong with how we're doing something, or even worse, and this is more likely the case, how we are. We start to think that there's something wrong with us, or that there's something missing, or that there's something that shouldn't be there. And so we are thinking that we're broken, that we're not correct, that we're not perfect as is, that we have to do something different to find the possibility of fulfillment, to find the possibility of contentment, the possibility of happiness, or even just the possibility of acceptance, because we have this negative bias that's telling us that we are wrong in some way. So when you have this going on, and you're coming from a perspective that there's something broken, and I see it all the time when I'm working with my clients, or when I see people in conscious communities and they come for healing, there's a few different ways in which people who think that they're broken deal with it. One of the first ways is that they might distract, right? If you think that there's something broken about you and you're trying to deal with that, then you might first start to distract yourself. And that's people who may use drugs or alcohol or other, vices and substances to deal with feelings they don't like, or thoughts they're not resonating with, because it hurts to think about when you're judging yourself. And so even though it's there, you kind of try to ignore it by doing something else, or drowning it out. And that's distraction. That's a distraction method, right? So people will use sex for that. People will use work for that. People will use substances for that. There's a lot of different ways. The next way in which people will avoid this sense of being broken is they will build. So one is to distract, another is to build. And that's when they get real busy proving the opposite of what they're actually believing. And so if they believe something's wrong, they're like, I will prove nothing's wrong. I will prove that I'm good enough. I will prove that I'm worthy. I'll prove that I can succeed. And these are the people who amount massive wealth and do really great in business, and they go really far, and they're at the top of the executive board, and they get the penthouse and all this stuff. And they look at themselves, and because that thought is still there, because they still have the same belief, no matter how far they went in life, two things might happen. One, they might lose it all, or two, they just are unhappy. They reach that level and they're still unhappy. It didn't fix it. So some will distract themselves. Some will build up an empire. And then others, and sometimes both of those two end up getting to this third one, will go into fixation, fixing. They want to be fixed. And this is when they start to seek out healers, coaches, teachers, facilitators. They go on retreats, they go to workshops, they enter into groups, they read books, and all of it from a mentality of, I'm broken and I'm trying to find someone to tell me how to fix it, or somebody to fix it for me. And you get a lot of this from people where they'll come. I'll tell you a little story. I love telling stories. Is it okay if I tell a story? You can just write up in the chat there. Say yes if it's okay if I can tell a story. I love telling stories. They map out and visualize the stuff that I'm sharing. So when I first got into spirituality myself, or into alternative lifestyle, it was through massage therapy, body work. I was doing a lot of learning and massages and working with different clients and different people. And what I found is that people would do the same thing. They'd come in, they'd have an issue. Maybe their back was thrown out, or their shoulder was always tense, or things like that. And I'd work it out, and they'd leave and be like, oh man, whew, I feel better. Man, you really fixed me up. And they would leave. And about 3 days later or a week later, they'd be back with the same exact condition. And I'd always wonder, oh, I fixed you last week. Why are you back with the same condition? What's going on? And what it was is that the root of that condition was a habit, was a pattern, was a lifestyle, was something they were doing consistently that was causing injury. And so I would say to them, I say, hey, look, I think it might be the bed you're sleeping in. I think it might be the way that you stand. I think it might be the way you get out of your car. That was a very common one. People would like leap out of the car and pull their backs. Instead of turn, get out. That's a little tip for you guys. So I would say, hey, here's a protocol that you can do to help not reinitiate that injury. Just do this kind of a thing, do this kind of posture, get a better mattress, whatever it is. And they would always tell me the same thing. They'd be like, yeah, but why? I said, because then you won't be injuring and hurting yourself and running this cycle and pattern. And they go, yeah, but it's okay because I come to you and you fix me. I get broken, you fix me. And this is actually the mentality that most people have, is when you empower somebody else, and empower might be a strong word, when you give over your power to somebody else to fix you, then you become dependent on them instead of actually going and checking out what is it that you're doing that might be causing the injury. What pattern or habit are you doing that's not creating the lifestyle that you really wish for? What's holding you back in your own way of being? And that is when people, if they start to do that, when they start to take ownership, when they stop looking outward for the answers and they start looking inward instead, that I believe is when they start to practice spirituality. So people will have a problem mentality. They start to look in. They start to look at where they're at. And this is where they begin a journey, a new journey, different from the ones that they were doing of distraction or of building or of just looking for somebody to fix them, but rather they start a journey of integration. I think this is a key word, this idea that when we are practicing spirituality, when we are practicing how to find ourselves, understand ourselves, and to choose the patterns, habits, and lifestyle that will build our life to the style and the ideal that we want, that's when we really start to practice spirituality, and that's when we really start to empower who we are by unmasking ourselves, by starting to integrate the parts that may have been lost in all those moments that you gave it away to a substance, or you gave it away to a bad relationship, or you gave it away to a job that wasn't, nourishing you. When you give it away to a resentment or a regret or to a grudge you have against someone. By the way, this is why they talk about forgiveness so much. It's not so that you can excuse the actions of another. It's so that you can get back the piece that you let go of in it, bring it back into yourself in wholeness and integration, is when we actually find our true spirit, inspiration. How are you guys doing? I just want to pause for a moment, check in. You can write into the chat how you're doing. So, by the way, throughout any of this, you are welcome to ask questions into the chat at any time. I'm kind of just channeling this in and going with it and sharing with you as much as I can. So within this time frame that we have, I'm going to just be going and sharing what comes through. We've been talking about modern day spirituality, and we looked at the idea that it's not this woo-woo thing, it's not these alternative practices per se, but rather spirituality in our modern day can be something more about the way that we are inspired and the habits that inspire us. And how do we cultivate those habits so that we live this inspired life, that we live with this sense of abundance, this sense of fullness, contentment, and integration. Another big word that I think is important when we look at the idea of spirituality is the word about alignment. And alignment has a lot to do with integration as well, or integrity. We are in our strongest integrity when we're aligned with our values, aligned with our truth. And a lot of times we don't even know what our truths are. We don't even know what our best expression is, because we have been so busy in those distractions, in those provings, in those buildings, in all these other things, that we were people pleasing. We were going outside of ourselves to try to fit in, when maybe your alignment doesn't fit in, but it stands out. Maybe your alignment doesn't fit in, but it stands out. Because truly, our unique, authentic expression is something that should stand out. It should not just be lost in the crowd. And I think that's something we've lost, because we have homogenized society so much to just be like everyone else. It's funny, you see when trends happen and you know, people will be wearing certain kind of fashion and they're like, yeah, I wear it because, you know, it's hip and I'm being unique. And then you see everybody else wearing the same stuff because they're all being unique in the same way. We have to look at what's our innate, natural uniqueness. What is our authentic, sometimes even vulnerable expression that gets to be shared that nobody else has because they are not you? And how often do you bypass that for the hope of doing some mask that shows up as a billboard in life to say, oh yes, no, this is who I am, I fit in, everything's good, instead of this is who I am and I have something to share that is unique. So we talk about spirituality, and I said that it's about inspiration. And I think most people think of inspiration as coming from outside of you. And I want to venture to say that inspiration gets to come from within you. Inspiration gets to come from inside, but it has to be cultivated because we have buried it beneath so many distractions and stories and beliefs and conditionings and fears and limitations. We put wall over wall over wall of trapdoors in place, and we don't know who we are anymore. So when people start the journey of spirituality, I believe it's really actually a journey of uncovering. It's a journey of taking piece by piece of, we'll call it like an eggshell. It's almost like you cocooned yourself into your conditioning, and now you got to crack the egg and start to let it go. Now, how does an animal that is born out of an egg actually get out? Does it do it by peeling the egg from the outside? No, that's its predator. You don't want to do that. But rather, it does it from inside, right? It does it by understanding itself, understanding that it's bigger than its container, and it starts to peck at the illusion of the walls until they break. And this, again, to me, is what spirituality is. It is to push the boundaries of who you believe you are to discover who you really are. It's to push the boundaries of who you believe you are to discover who you really are. Let me step back for a moment, pause for a second, let you guys take a drink if you need to. I also need to take a drink. And I'd like to share with you the 3 pillars that I talked about earlier, because I think they're really important in understanding this entire philosophy and where we're going with spirituality. So I mentioned at the very beginning that I have 3 pillars that I almost always share with people in my talks and with clients and books and things like that. And these 3 pillars are acceptance, permission, and expression. Acceptance, permission, and expression. They spell ape, so it makes it really easy to remember. Now, acceptance is the first one, and acceptance is wrapped up into awareness as well, because to accept or to recognize the reality of what is. Notice, acceptance to me is not to tolerate what is. It's not to simply be like, okay, you have to be okay with this because you're spiritual. That's called spiritual bypass. That's not a good thing. But rather, acceptance is to become aware of what the reality is. Because so often we're in denial. So often we are in filter or distortion or omission. We're not really seeing what the reality is. And so you develop this awareness. You develop and cultivate this perception to see without filter, to see without identity, to take the lens off so that you can just see it for what it is. And from there, you can start to work with it because now you're dealing with reality instead of story. Remember, I said earlier that I believe it's stories that are covering us up and that we have buried our true identity, our true spirit, inspiration. We've buried it under all these stories or beliefs. When we can start to let go of those stories, because we are starting to accept the reality of things instead of the way that we have perceived it, we start to open up to other perceptions, other angles, and eventually we realize that actually every single possible expression is available in that moment. And what depends on, or how it depends, or what dictates what it's going to be, is going to be the one you choose. And so now you can start to choose wisely. And this is where we kind of move into permission. So we go from acceptance, which is to recognize the reality of what is. We start to move into permission. Permission, I like to define as simply being to allow for change. To allow for change. Very simple, right? And when we start to allow for change, I'm just going to plug my laptop in here. When we allow for change, we are not forcing it, we are not manipulating it, we are not trying to have an agenda, but we simply say, hey, I believe there is a possibility this could be different. That's allowing for change. It's just to believe in the possibility. It's to simply say, hey, this could be different. A lot of times clients will come to me and they'll literally say, oh, you know, I'm swearing off dating. Like, all the people I meet, they're terrible. I'm tired of it. I'm not going to do it anymore. Then they see someone cute and they're like, hi, you know, and they go back into the pattern. But the problem is that they were stuck in the idea that it wasn't going to change. So even if they go after this person and they start a relationship or something happens, they're still in the mentality that, yeah, this isn't going to work out. Or maybe somebody gets a job and they're like, yeah, I always get fired. Or an opportunity comes along and the mentality is, oh, I'm not meant for those opportunities. And so they always pass them. When we have a certain mentality that says that something cannot change, that's called a fixed mindset. What we want to have is a growth mindset or an open mindset that simply says, oh, things could change. Because the reality is that everything is changing in every single moment. Everything is changing. Your cells in your body renew like every day. And I think it's every 7 months, your organs are brand new. So everything is always changing. Now, I say that comment. We want to talk about habits and what inspires us, but also what are the habits that we do that aren't inspiring and may actually be detrimental to us in our seeking of empowerment. When I say your organs are renewed almost every 7 months, the first question I always get from people, they'll say, oh, really? Well, then how do people get sick? Huh? If your organs are renewing every 7 months, you should be immortal. You should never get sick. I go, yeah, that's if you are nourishing them. But if your pattern is to give them bad nutrients, bad ingredients, then you're going to consistently keep them unhealthy. It's not that they don't renew into health, it's that you keep them down. So our habits are so important, right? So we go from permission now to expression, and expression is the actions that you take and the way that you allow yourself to be seen. So we went from acceptance, which is to recognize the reality of what is so that you can actually work with it. It's like knowing the cards that are in your hand. You know, what have you been dealt? And then from there, allowing for the possibility of change. That's permission. And from permission, we start to move into this expression of who we can be, who we allow ourselves to be, and how we act upon it. Now, this is what we start to cultivate. This is where we start to create the habits. And the other two, the acceptance and the permission, were to discover, because we started to uncover who we really are. We start to notice it for ourselves. Maybe even if you're doing certain practices like meditation or breathwork or yoga or dance or whatever it is that you do, or maybe it's writing or journaling or jogging or cooking, you know, and everybody has their own way, their own ritual and habit that's going to develop and cultivate the inspiration within. So what is it? I'm going to ask you this question right now. What is it that actually drives you? What is it that when it comes up, it's not that you're thinking, oh yeah, I have to do that, or I'm expected to do that, I'm obligated to do that, but you go like, oh, I love doing that. I love this activity. I love this process. Notice I'm not talking about the result. A lot of times we get lost. We're like, well, yeah, I love to work. And I'll be like, really? You like going into work and this and that? And some people, they love their job. They've created a passion job, you know. But other people, they might be working like a 9-to-5 job in a little cubicle and this and that. And you go, really? You love your work? We're like, well, I love my paycheck. So they're after the result, right? And so a lot of times we will be okay with the means to the end because we're just looking at the result. But to be inspired has to be in the moment of the process, in the moment of the journey. It's part of the step by step. It's not about where you're getting. It's not about the destination, but rather it's about the direction and the path that you're walking. You'll notice in most spiritual traditions, different from religious traditions. So most religious traditions, and I'm not, negating anything, but I just want to compare them. Religious traditions always have a destination. They always have a destination. There's heaven, there's nirvana, there's Valhalla, and there's a good destination and there's a bad destination, right? And so both those destinations are meant to motivate you, different from inspire, motivate you to do the right thing. And only that's based on social rules. Now, the difference between that and spirituality. So in a religion, for instance, you're listening to the doctrine that has been handed down. In spirituality, you're listening to traditions and wisdom, but you're looking within to see what your truth is. And from that place, you start to develop something that inspires you towards a direction. There is no destination. Sometimes people will talk about enlightenment, but enlightenment has a very distorted understanding. People think that enlightenment is that you reach a destination and you're like, I have achieved the all-knowing, the omnipotent, the most grand of achievements. I am enlightened. Now what? And you're just sitting there because it's like, well, great, okay, you reached where you wanted to be. Now what? So it's not about reaching a place. It's not about getting to the conclusion. It's not about finding a place that you can just stop. But it's actually about the continuing of a process of growth. I'm going to add that in there. It's not just a process, but it is a process of growth. And so when we are constantly growing, then we find ourselves being inspired. And in that inspiration, we have the energy and we keep moving and moving and moving. Now, I see a little question there, and I love that question. Isn't the destination happiness? Awesome question. Okay. Here's my response to that. Happiness isn't a place. It's a state of being. So again, it's not about getting somewhere that you can then just be okay. Because if you think of happiness as a place that you get to, right? Even if it's the state of being that you get to, if you think of it in that way, then once you're there, you're like, okay, great. I don't have to do anything anymore. Now I can just be here in this bliss of happiness. And I can guarantee that after a week or two, or less, you'll be like, I'm bored. I'm not happy anymore. What's next? Right? So it doesn't work. Every time that we set it as a destination, then we're going to get there and we're going to be unhappy because we're done. And yet we're not done. And so we're like, what do I do now? And so the idea is to simply know that we're not trying to get somewhere, we're going somewhere. We're not trying to get somewhere, but we're going somewhere. This makes such a difference in it. We're moving towards something. And this idea of consistent growth as part of spirituality, as going towards a direction instead of a destination. This is really important because a lot of times what I see happen is even when I work with a client, I'm coaching them, or I do a healing session or something, and maybe there was a perception that we're broken, and we work on that, and then you get to a place where they're like, okay, I'm not broken anymore. I feel good. I'm healthy again. That emotion or that grief or that stuck energy or something that was blocked, it's been freed. And they go, great, I don't have to do anything anymore now. I don't have to keep trying. And within a week or a month, they're right back to the same place that they were because they stopped growing. I look at it kind of like you're a car and you're going up a mountainside, right? It's a really steep mountain. We go more like this, right? We're going up a mountainside, and in that car, there's no brakes. So if you're not accelerating, even slowly, and you stop moving forward, guess which way you're going to go? No brakes. You're going to slip back down. And that's actually how life is that if we're not growing, guess what we're doing? We're dying. If we're not growing, we're dying. And that may be an ego death. It might be an identity death. It may be a physical death. A lot of times our health literally deteriorates as we stop doing. You look at retirees all the time. They show it in the statistics of different countries that when an elderly generation stops working and they don't do anything, they sit in an old folks home or they just sit at home and do nothing, they tend to die within years of retiring. Whereas those who retire but continue to be active in life, maybe it's in social circles, maybe it's in playing games, or maybe it's actually doing a side hobby or still work, but not for money. When they do that, they live for years on. So if we just stop doing because we think we reached the destination, which by the way, at least in America, there's a terrible mentality that says, I work until I get to that point that I can finally retire, then I can do nothing. Wrong idea. Choose the activity, the habits that you want to do that inspire you throughout your life, and you will live eternally until you die. But you will live wonderfully, and you will live inspired and full and content, integrated and whole. So we are talking about spirituality today, modern day spirituality, a difference from, we'll say, spiritual traditions or spiritual communities or kind of that idea of spirituality that says you have to follow a certain doctrine, but rather spirituality within. What is the internal inspiration that gets to come through you? What is the spirit in you that moves through you, through your habits and actions and behaviors on a daily, consistent basis that keeps you growing and moving in a direction along a path? That is spirituality in modern day. And actually, I believe in ancient times as well, when it got distorted along the way and forgotten. But spirituality can be. I only offer possibilities. I'm not telling you what the truth is, but this is my truth, so I'm going to share it. Spirituality for me is the consistent growth of an inspiration along a path that comes from within. The consistent growth of an inspiration along a path, and it comes from within. So we began today with this idea of that most people come to spirituality thinking that they're broken. And I venture to hope, and I really invite people to realize that hopefully in the process and the journey of looking within spiritually, you start to realize that you're not broken, but that there's a story that's broken, that there's something covering up your wholeness. If you've ever seen a magic show and you've seen the magician go up on stage and they bring out a box and they show you that the box is empty. There's nothing in the box. They show you all the sides. And maybe after a few magical words and some flashes and maybe covering the box for a moment, they lift up the cover and boom, there's a rabbit there. If it's a really big box, their assistant is there, right? I'm going to let you in on a little magician's secret. The box was never empty. The box was never empty. The thing was already there, but there was an illusion, maybe a mirror, maybe a false back, something that made it look like it was empty. And that false illusion is the story. You are not empty. You are not broken. There's nothing to be fixed. You are whole, fulfilled, and amazing. But if the story is in front of it telling you that something's wrong, then you don't know that. And so I believe the journey of spirituality is the journey of uncovering the stories, looking beyond them and beneath them, and realizing that what is there does not need to be added to, does not need to be taken from, but is perfect as it is already whole. And you can continue to cultivate the awareness of that wholeness, and that's the growth. You see, it's kind of like a mirror. If the mirror was pristinely clean and you looked at it, you would see your pure reflection and you would be like, damn, that is a beautiful person. But over time, if you don't consistently clean the mirror, then it builds up, it has residue, it has dust, it has dirt, and you look at it and you're like, ooh, that is a grimy person. You see, spirituality is probably actually more the process of consistently clarifying, uncovering, clearing our system so that we can experience the inspiration and the energy and the movement of who we really are into the world. And that's what those habits would then be, is what are your habits that consistently energize and clarify who you are? So I'm gonna wrap this up and share a quick summary of what we've been talking about. Unless there's any questions, if there are, you're welcome to put them in the chat box. We've been talking about modern day spirituality. We went through the idea that it is more than a tradition that you might follow or a belief that you might do, but rather it is to seek within the inspiration that moves you. And in that inspiration, you have rituals that go with it. That's the spirit is the inspiration. The ritual is the spiritual. And in those rituals or habits that you do consistently daily is to grow and cleanse and clarify who you really are. And you move forward in your life with that, not trying to find a destination, not trying to get somewhere, but going somewhere and moving yourself in such a beautiful way that as you do, as you pass by people, it might spark a little bit of inspiration in their life, and all of a sudden they start to find their own spirit, their own inspiration, and you find yourself moving with community towards something, but not really. You are just moving in a direction. And so I leave you with that thought of inspiration today and spirituality. Thank you so much. Until next time, thank you for joining. This will be put up later on the platform so that you have access to it and you can watch again if you want to take more notes if you didn't catch something. And I will see you guys next week. Thank you.